Hello, everybody. My name is Grayson Milbourne, and I'm the Security Intelligence Director at OpenText Security Solutions. In this HealthNet security video, I'm going to talk about operation uptime and why cyber resilience is the right strategy to deal with the ever-changing threat of social engineering. Now, social engineering, you might be thinking, yeah, Grayson, I know what you're talking about. Phishing sites, phishing emails, even things that are more targeted spear phishing. But you might be surprised to realize that there's a lot more innovation that goes into how social engineering campaigns are carried out. So take, for example, games. We've seen an enormous spike, especially since the Log4j exploit was discovered earlier this year, in gaming platforms being targeted and lures being used to convince users to give over their passwords, or even worse yet, visit a site or give somebody remote access to the computer. Additionally, we've seen some really creative social engineering attacks targeting the remote work phenomenon, or I guess the new normal as we have it in the post-pandemic world. But what we see now today are examples of kind of catfishing the interview process and having the candidate using a deepfake voice bot to convince the interviewer that they're somebody that they're not. So imagine the security risk you have there when you inadvertently hire somebody who isn't who they claim to be. Additionally, we continue to see social engineering and phishing attacks target the younger generation, and through social media platforms like TikTok, we continue to see a really big uptick in the number of and complexity of types of social engineering attacks. There's another one that I'll talk about that's callback-based phishing, and this is where you might receive an SMS or an email that, to get around that suspicion that a lot of us have, will ask you actually to call a number in that SMS or in that email. And of course, on the other end of that line is a hacker or a social engineer expert who's just waiting to take advantage. So these threats are real, and studies show that about 95+% of attacks occur because of a human mistake. And this is because social engineering is a constantly evolving and really effective tool for cyber criminals to use to begin an attack. So what can you do to stay safe? So I'm a big proponent of the cyber resilience strategy, and this is an ongoing life cycle that encompasses 6 steps, and I'll give you those now and we'll talk through them in a little bit more detail. But the 6 steps are to identify, to protect, to defend, to recover, to respond, and to educate. Now, this is an ongoing cycle, and it's not something you just do once, but it's a living cycle that you're constantly going through and improving upon. So let's start with identification, right? I think it makes sense, right? We don't know how to protect what we don't know we have. And so it's important to understand what systems you have and how often those systems are connected to the outbound internet, like where is remote desktop protocol enabled, who has access to it, but also who are our people. Our employees are one of our biggest assets. And understanding their user access rights is a really important component to having a strong cyber resilience posture. The second step is to protect. And this is an obvious step, right? Like, now that we've identified what we have, we want to protect those assets. So having things like endpoint security or layered security approach at the endpoint, so firewall, DNS protection, these are great solutions that provide a technological approach to protecting that device. But that gets us to that next stage of to detect. And in the detection step, it's important to look at what might have been missed by the protection layer. And this is where the EDR types of programs fit in and provide additional telemetry to show perhaps like a new user account has been created that shouldn't be there. Or maybe somebody's logging in from a location that's unusual. Or you might see too many bounced login attempts. There's a lot of artifacts that can expose whether or not an intruder has broken in. And so the detection phase allows you to evaluate your network environment, your business environment, for any sort of indications that an attack may have taken place. Now, sometimes attacks do take place, and this is why it's important to have a response step. And response is not just one type of response. It's important to think about the different types of security incidences that you might need to respond to. So we'll pick on ransomware because that's a really prevalent attack today. So having a ransomware response plan ahead of time is a great way to ensure that you don't maybe have to pay the ransom and that you can react accordingly without having much downtime. Of course, there could be a different type of security incident, something like, a user needs a password reset, or perhaps malware was detected on a device. But having a well-rehearsed response plan is a really important step in the cyber resilience framework to ensure that when things do go wrong, you're not scrambling at the worst possible time. Now, this leads us into the recovery phase, and this is where we reflect on how we responded and what went wrong that led to the infection in the first place. This is a great opportunity to ensure that you don't fall for the same mistake again. Perhaps it's an employee that needed some additional education, or maybe you're using some out-of-date or unpatched external hardware that provided access to a remote hacker. So in the response phase, we figure out what went wrong and what do we need to do better to prevent that from happening again. And then this finally leads us to education. And education's very important, and it's also a very inexpensive way to drive awareness of what threats your employees face. And the reality is in the threat landscape, it's important to keep education at a current interval. I recommend doing it at least quarterly and doing simulation-based attacks to test and see whether or not your users are staying up to speed with respect to the threats that they face. So that's the cyber resilience framework, and I'm glad to have gotten to talk to you guys a little bit about it. Well, apologies there, my contacts sting me sometimes, but in any event, hey, it's a really important framework to understand and how to stay safe, because in today's threat landscape, it's much more of an if and not a when. And so when the threat does actually occur, the cyber resilience framework does a great job of ensuring that you can get your business back on its feet as soon as possible. Well, thanks for listening to me today. It's been a pleasure to connect with you through HelpNet security videos, and I look forward to a future engagement. Enjoy your day. Take care.